How many times have you set a goal, for example, joining the gym, and said to yourself, this is going to be the time I actually commit, I'm going to get in the best shape of my life, and you do genuinely really mean it in the moment. For a few days, maybe you really commit, but day 5 or 6 rolls around, and lo and behold, you self-sabotage. You spiral right back to exactly where you were before, sat on your ass doing niche. If you work for yourself, if you have a business, a client roster, or any kind of body of work that you call your own, and you keep calling yourself lazy or inconsistent, this video is going to reframe the whole thing, because you are not lazy. You are doing exactly what your brain is built to do. You are clinging to what is familiar. You are mistaking that familiarity for who you are, and you are staying loyal to a set of limits that you never actually chose. By the end of this video, you're going to see the real mechanism for why you do this, why you can't just push through it, and what has to happen first before any goal or habit or system will ever stick. So let's get rid of this laziness idea, because it is ironically just lazy thinking. If you were actually lazy, you would be lazy everywhere. But that's not true. You will happily grind for 12 hours on the thing that you already know how to do. You will answer like 40 emails a day. You will go through Slack. You will sit in another pointless meeting about something you don't necessarily need to be involved in whatsoever. Your calendar is full of input, but your output is flat. And what you avoid is probably suspiciously specific. It is always the thing that would require you to become someone that you aren't currently. And I see this constantly with clients. One version sounds like, I just need a roadmap. I need weeks of preparation for a task that you candidly probably already know how to do, because studying produces the feeling of progress without the risk of doing something. The studying was never the problem being solved. You didn't need more information. The unfamiliar self on the side of doing the thing was. Your brain has one prime directive, and a long time ago it decided that directive means familiar. The nervous system craves familiarity, and it wants what it recognizes, even when what it recognizes is what's quietly killing you. It will choose a known mystery over an unknown improvement every single time, because the known thing has a flaw that it understands. So you gravitate to what is familiar, and you call it, that's just me being me. There is a trap inside the trap. You say, I can't help it. This is just how I am. You are passive, like the weather. You are trying, ideally, to become more active. I am the one maintaining this. Now, one is a fact about you. The other is a behavior that you are doing, which means it is a behavior that you can stop if it is not helpful. What you've been calling consistency is a rut, and the difference is your choice. You can choose to be consistent, and consistency is picking the same thing on purpose. A rut is defaulting to it because the alternative feels dangerous. They look identical from the outside. But why is this so hard to escape? Because ultimately, you will only ever function inside limitations you currently believe are real. And the limits you believe in are almost never the limits that exist. The gap between those two things is where your entire life is stuck. There is a hierarchy to how your choices work. I've done multiple videos on this. At the surface, reactive choices. These are autopilot decisions. Below that, framework choices. These are the lenses that you see reality through. And at the very bottom, identity choices. Your beliefs about who you are and what's possible for someone like you. That bottom layer sets the ceiling. Everything above it can only operate inside of the room that that layer builds. So the most dangerous part is that that ceiling is invisible. The strongest limitations don't feel like actual beliefs. The limiting beliefs that you hold don't even feel like beliefs. They feel like that's just how the world works, and you don't argue with them because you don't even see them. A founder that I worked with had built his entire business on referrals and cold outbound, and flatly refuses to run ads. His reason every time was, I've never run ads. That was the whole thing. I've never done this before. I don't need to. And we worked through an exercise where we tried to answer why. And there was, at the end of it, a very long pause, and then he said, in his words, I just always shoot with my right foot. And he heard it as he left his mouth. The exercise that we did made him realize how ridiculous it would be to only shoot a football at a goal with his right foot. He would be ineffective. And lo and behold, within minutes, he was mapping out, how he could run the ads and what he would do, and lo and behold, he built it that weekend. Nothing changed about his skills. in the exercise. It was a preference that he'd mistaken for an identity. And the moment that you look at it and you examine it properly, it disappears. You are running your life inside that same paradigm of I can only shoot at goal with my right foot. You can't see it because from the inside, the ceiling just looks like the sky, right? So the question is, where do these ceilings come from? You have to think of your brain as hardware, right? And your mind as software. That software is going to get pre-programmed over years and years and years, right? Parents, teachers, the things people say about you or to you when you're young. And most of it you never choose to believe, right? It gets installed in your brain and you treat it as a fact. Somewhere in that installation process are what I call bad code. These are beliefs that at some point may have served you, but you've absorbed them passively and now you run them automatically. So for example, I really struggle with finishing things, right? I'm not good with money. People like me don't do that. All of this bad code feels really permanent. Every time you run it, you've strengthened the neural pathway behind it in your brain. When you say, I'm not disciplined, a few thousand times over the course of your entire life, that becomes the path of least resistance. Running down it costs nothing. It is effortless. Becoming someone new who actually is disciplined means cutting a fresh trail through your brain. And the first 100 attempts at that, it is going to be heavy going. Your energy conservation focused brain is going to be like, nah, don't bother. Go back to what you know. The pull back to this already established pavement is what you call laziness. It is you not realizing that this initial stage is going to require effort and is going to probably feel like hardship. The order of operations matters more than anything else in this video. You cannot install a new identity before you examine the old code, right? It is going to be like playing whack-a-mole. If you slap a new habit or affirmation on top of old code that runs underneath, you are painting over rust. You are putting perfume on a casket. You have to find the specific line items first. You have to name them. You have to understand what governs you. A limiting belief only has power when it's invisible. When you make that known, it stops being reality and it starts being what it is in actuality. It is an opinion about yourself that you have chosen to believe. The belief that I had to work on the most, right? Candid, I guess, like transparent moment, is the one that I also see in really successful founders. It is, I have to struggle to earn anything worth having. Anything that comes easy is luck or a trap or too good to be true, right? An old mentor of mine said to me, if you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them. And they were right. It explains why I would blow up a good run the second that things started to feel easy. Why anytime I felt calm, it felt like something was going wrong, like there was something that I wasn't seeing. Why every single win that I had felt like a debt that was slowly getting repaid instead of something that was actually enjoyable. I would sit in the midst of a really good month scanning for something to go wrong, and because I was hunting for this ultimate truth that it was all gonna crumble, I would find a way of making that happen. Predicting the collapse turned into a way of creating the collapse. And from the outside, it looks like I was really inconsistent, that I was putting in the work, but it wasn't inconsistency. I was being perfectly consistent with the part of my brain that said, you're not allowed to be comfortable. And this, I guess, typology of a bad code or pattern, this idea that your identity is fused with struggle to a number that you need to hit, to an old version of you. I've seen this, 50 plus times across founders, traders, execs, you name it. It is the single most common thing I see. One of the founders I work with, ex-corporate, very senior historically, started his own thing, stalled for almost a year at a revenue ceiling of like 30K a month. And we dug into the exact number and we found out that that is the exact amount that he would get as one of his bonuses. So the ceiling wasn't a condition in the market. It wasn't anything wrong with his strategy. It was an anchor that his brain had placed on, this is a reasonable amount of money. Well, when you quit that job, that no longer becomes a reasonable standard, right? But it doesn't mean that the code that runs underneath changes. But the day that he saw that actually written down and pieced out, the plateau started to move. His strategy didn't necessarily change, but the code did. So the first lever is not necessarily a habit, it's not necessarily a goal. It is understanding the code that you've just found out that exists in your brain. And there is a very simple tool for this. When you catch a limiting belief, you literally use two words. Says who? I'm not disciplined. Says who? You trace that back to the source. Whose voice is that? Is it a parent? Is it a teacher? Is it a younger version of you who had no idea of what you'd be capable of at this age with all of the experience that you have, right? 9 times out of 10, the source that said it then has no authority about who you are now, but you've kept that up. The instant that you see that, the belief now kind of seems a bit silly, right? It loses its grip on you because you realize that you're the one that has been redoing that over and over and over and over again in your head every day, which means that you can stop and you can put in something else in its place. So then you have to write out something new, right? And you have to write it in the present tense as if it was already true, right? You are almost predefining this. Who are you? Don't write what you do. Right? I finish what I start collapses the first time you don't finish what you start, right? But a statement about who you are doesn't depend on yesterday's performance, right? If you say, I'm enough without having to struggle, right? Good things are allowed to come easily to me. I'm allowed to grow past everyone who comes before me, right? If you say this to yourself like a mantra, right? If you say it when you feel awful and you're like, I don't believe this, that is where your old code is going to kick in the hardest, where you don't believe, right? That is where you're going to go back to the old established path, right? But every single rep that you do, when you do say it when you don't believe, is another inch of the new trail being laid down, right? You are putting in a vote for a version of you that doesn't fully exist, and you are voting often enough to make it feel real. The lever, however, is slow, right? The old pathway is a highway and the new one is like a patch of grass that is being trodden on. And while your brain takes the highway out of pure habit, nothing visible is going to have changed, and that is where you get this idea that, oh, it's pointless, it's not moving. What you have to understand is the system is defending equilibrium, right? It is trying to get you to revert back to what is familiar, and it is loudest right before it breaks. But knowing that doesn't get you to move. Expanding your ceiling tells you what's now possible, but it doesn't make you act on it. The old identity needs something to change it, to get it out of autopilot, right? What you need is a forcing function, a consequence that you build on purpose so that defaulting to the old you costs more than becoming a version of the new you. And this works because of loss aversion. We feel a loss twice as much as we do an equivalent gain. And the old identity has survived because inaction was free. A forcing function puts the toll on the old road. Okay, so there's a video about this that I just made, right? I'll post the link here. A trader that I was in talks with ran this stalling pattern, right, when we were on our first call, right? He said, I'm going to roadmap whether there's value here and get back to you, which is the exact same move that he'd complained about having within his own trading behavior. So I told him, this is what you're doing, and I gave him a forcing function. You decide within the week, right? Or the price goes up massively, right? I added, I think, like 60% to the total price. He'd spent months thinking things over for zero personal cost, but the moment that there's a delay and it has a price on it, now you're forced to make a decision. Not because there's new information that you wouldn't have gotten, but because now the familiar option of doing nothing costs more than the unfamiliar one, which is making a choice. So you have to build your own toll, right? Announce this new identity publicly. Make it so that slipping costs you reputation. It costs you money. It gives someone, permission to hold this over your head. The job is you make the old identity very expensive to sit in because cost is the only language that your nervous system, which is currently wired for survival, is going to move for. Now, both of these things lock together because most motivation is a bear that is chasing you, right? Falling behind, running out of money, being seen as a failure, whatever it is, right? Fear is going to push you, and pushing works until the bear disappears. Once you have a good month and things feel stable, you fall apart because running was only about escaping the thing that was a threat. But the new identity is a pull. It is a version of you up ahead that you're walking towards on purpose, and the pull doesn't vanish when things get easy because it was never about a threat. The forcing function gives you the push, the identity gives you a pull. But first you need to examine the bad code. Then you need to install the identity on clean ground, knowing what you know about yourself. That is the whole function. You have to do this first, or you're just painting over the rust, right? You're perfume on a casket. So stop calling yourself lazy. You were never lazy. You were just faithful to what is familiar. You were operating within a box that you had placed upon yourself that you never realized. You were running old code that you never wanted to uninstall because you never chose to install it in the first place. The day that you drag all of the code into the forefront of your life is the day that it stops being your reality and starts being a choice. What I want you to do is I want you to write down one limiting belief that you've been mistaking for a fact, and then the new one that you're replacing it with. In the present tense, who you are, not what you do.